Su Shang is a Chinese-Canadian writer. She is the author of a novel, The Immortal Woman, House of Anansi, March 2025, which was a CBC Most Read Historical Fiction pick, a finalist for the Toronto Book Award, a Rakuten Kobo Best Fiction of the Month, and won the 2025 Independent Publishers Book Award. CBC named her one of the 2025 Writers to Watch. A short fiction we recognize in Prairie Fire Fiction Context, Montreal Fiction Prize, Canadian Authors Association National Context, ILS Fence Fiction Context, among others. And in today's episode of Author Interview, it's my pleasure, excitement, joy, and honor to offer the show today, Su Shang. How are you doing today, Shu? Thank you very much for joining on.
Hello, Peter. I'm doing really well. I hope you're doing well too. Thanks so much for um, this opportunity. Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking to you today.
Absolutely. I must say it's my utmost pleasure, really, that we are here to connect virtual internet connectivity, many miles and countries and oceans apart. Quite amazing, really. Our internet connects us together, despite the fact that several miles away from one another. And I want to say once again, thank you very much for joining in today to talk about your amazing works.
Oh, of course. Yeah, this I've been listening to this podcast. It's been just uh, such an exciting journey since publishing the book and talking to authors from all over the country and the world as well. So you're right. Yeah, indeed, such a miracle that we get connected over the
Absolutely.
internet.
Absolutely. Thank you. And so we are going to get into the nitty-gritty of what actually inspired you to write Immortal Woman. But then you've been a writer now for some years, and I wanted to ask you, what is your first creative spark as a writer, especially towards the publication of The Immortal Woman? What is that things that fuels you in to write, that inspire you to get into this beautiful journey of literature? And also, how did you come about the title name, The Immortal, particularly the word immortal, which I find to be quite deep and quite introspective in nature? If you can run us through the making of this book, that'll be great.
Yeah, of course. That's a really good question. And for this particular book, I do have a very strong foundation going into it because it's a very long process. So I grew up hearing many stories from my parents and grandparents' generations. Usually, we were just be sitting around dinner table, and the topics often veer into politics and history and social issues. And even as a young child, I quickly
Mhm.
noticed that there was a pretty deep disconnection between what, my family were privately talking about and what was discussed in the public discourse. So the stories I heard in privacy really often didn't exist in my history books at all. Even some of the fiction books I could get my hands on.
Wow.
So that was a big puzzle for me. And then in my early 20s, I immigrated to North America. And all of a sudden, I just had access to all that tabooed history of my birth country. I could read any books, I could watch any films and documentaries. And I became obsessed with understanding that tabooed history. So my father was a reluctant student leader in the Red Guards during the Cultural Revolution, and he actually used his position to protect his teachers. And I remember hearing tidbits of that story as a kid, and I just found that so fascinating because the whole nation seemed to be swept away by an extreme ideology, but there were these hidden pockets of humanity and kindness in the undercurrent. So I just thought, that was sort of the starting point of the book, where I was someone who was born after the Cultural Revolution, but still very much felt the impact of all that political upheaval that happened to my parents' generation.
Mm,
And so I wanted to be able to really dive into it, to understand it, to reconcile with it.
mm,
And because we were not allowed to talk about it openly when I was growing up. So this book is really an attempt to remember and to heal. So that's
wow.
the foundation of the whole creative process around this book. In terms of the title, Yeah, so at the very literal level, so some of your listeners may be reading this book, they will see Immortal Women is quite prominently featured in the book. So
Mm.
she is the patron saint of the main character's ancestral village. She very much embodies tradition, and therefore she was a threat that the Maoist China during the Cultural Revolution was desperately seeking to eradicate.
Wow.
And ironically, perhaps, she's also, or the patron saint, this concept is also something the heartbroken mother character during her early motherhood resolves to expunge from her daughter's life because she has
Mm.
sort of lost hope of her culture and her country. But at the same time, I see Immortal Woman as a symbolic stand-in for
Wow.
both and the daughter character because they, despite decades of trauma, ultimately reemerged into the light. They were resilient and enduring at the end of the book. So very much like the Mortal Women.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's an amazing one, actually, that I must say. I love your description of that. Quite beautiful and quite awesome. That's a lovely foundation and story that you've just told us quite amazingly. Thank you very much. And I wanted to ask you, out of my curiosity, because I'm always very kind of a curious person, and I think this is one of the things that makes journalism to be quite interesting. I wanted to ask you how much of your own family history or personal experience shaped the character of Lemai, who happens to be the mother, especially at time as a Red Guard leader and journalist. And also, how did you balance historical and political detail with the personal lives of the characters in your story? I'd love your answer to that.
hmm Yeah, great question. So yeah, as you point out, part of the book was inspired by the experiences my own family member, who was a reluctant, which is a keyword, reluctant student record leader during the Cultural Revolution. But the character has been heavily fictionalized, and also part of this that historical period. The narrative were constructed based on, the narratives, the oral histories, the witness accounts I encountered during my research. So it's not entirely based on my family member's story. But indeed, it was sort of a point of departure, something I felt quite personal and very important as sort of my own origin story. And I sat with that raw material for actually many years before I began writing. And it's not just that Red Guard leader character, but also many characters around that Red Guard leader. And some of the characters are basically falling into the villains categories as well. Especially if the character was based on someone from real life, even remotely, vaguely, I want to make sure I find true compassion before writing about them.
Mm,
I think it's just, to me, it's the only way to craft three-dimensional characters. Um, and I find this act and process of fictionalizing revealed more emotional truth than
mm,
would have been possible if I were to write a biography or a memoir. The more I altered the biological facts of the character from their real life inspirations,
mm,
I found myself become bolder and bolder to explore their deep psyches. Yeah, so ultimately, I see this whole process as an opportunity to have a really deep, involved dialogue with all my characters, whether they're based on real life or not.
mm,
This is sort of a long-winded answer to say that in this process of 20 something drafts, these characters that were inspired by real life have become someone else. But I find these someone else even more interesting because I'm able to freely have a deep conversation with them.
mm. Oh, wow. That's an amazing one, I must say, actually. I love your description of this. Quite beautiful and quite awesome. Thank you very much for sharing
Thank
with
you.
us. And the novel raises questions around unresolved political trauma internalized racism, and eroded identities. What research did you do to ensure these themes came through authentically? And also, if there are other themes aside this that you expounded in this novel, I'd like you to share with us without giving much information away.
Yeah, sure. Um, Yeah, so in terms of research, yeah, so in the early years after I arrived at America, I spent pretty much all my spare time reading books, watching documentaries, listening to lectures about the modern Chinese history that was missing from the childhood textbooks I had. And in terms of colonial mentality, internalized racism, you mentioned, I was first introduced to the concept through reading Frantz Fanon's books, iconic books, The Wretched of the Earth, Black Skin, White Masks. And I was absolutely fascinated by this concept of colonial mentality. And Fanon obviously is such a literary icon and political icon when it comes to revealing the internalized racism. And I felt I was very much able to relate to his narrative. And that I then read books and papers from several professors. One is E.J.R. David, the other is Sumi Okazaki. They're the leading researchers who conceived the groundbreaking colonial mentality scale, and they had quite a few very thought-provoking academic papers on that. And you mentioned there's a lot of tension in this book, right? There's the
Yeah.
tension between East West, between past and present, between political idealism and reality.
Mm,
Um, and I think all these dichotomies indeed present challenges to my writing. My main question often is how do I balance a wide range of viewpoints I encounter in my research,
yeah.
and also from my lived experiences and observations. So sometimes I will read something and I would think, okay, is there ideological biases embedded
Yeah.
in this material?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm sure, as a writer and novelist yourself, you probably have similar experience. Um,
Yeah.
but certainly, like, I feel sometimes as novelists, we are not reporters, so we are probably have a freer license to reveal moral, even ideological leanings in our work. But I personally don't prefer to do that. I prefer not to pass judgment on my characters without at least room for ambiguity and debate. I just think that's what fiction is supposed to do. The fiction is supposed to show nuance and complexity when a public political discourse can be quite black and white. And one example is, in the Western narrative, for instance, the destructiveness of communist revolutions is widely acknowledged. But at the same time, so that my book obviously talk about that, but also at the same time, I want to present a balancing viewpoint, because if we don't, we risk being blind to the sophistication of contemporary propaganda, to the popular sentiments of quote unquote the people over there. We risk being perpetually puzzled by the origin of nationalism in those non-Western countries. So I think it's important to show viewpoints from a variety of sources. Yeah, so in terms of the theme, I think you mentioned quite a few already. The book obviously is focusing on this mother-daughter pair, Chinese
Mm,
mother-daughter. They're wrestling with the demons of their past.
yeah.
It talks about, the rise of nationalism in China as well, following its meteoric economic rise. It talks about the conflicts and confrontation between people in different ideological camps within China. It also talks about the new immigrants, new Chinese immigrants in North America, because, they carry trauma from their history, but at the same time, they are often perceived as visible minorities from an enemy state, right? We've got this Cold War mentality richly displayed in the Western government and media. So there's a lot of conflictual feelings there, the conflictual feelings for their country of birth and the suspicion of dual loyalties that were imposed on them. They can all take a psychological toll on them. So in the book, I talked about sort of how can they really find a sense of belonging in this very divided world? And really, I'm hoping to have a framework to talk about sort of the future of multiculturalism in
Mhm.
this divided world.
Wow, that's an amazing answer you've provided. Quite amazing, quite great, quite beautiful. And I love your deep, very vast answers, detailed responses to these questions. Particularly, I love what you mean by the dichotomies was others to portray. Quite interesting. And now I wanted to ask you, because one of the most interesting thing to me as a writer and reader is to listen to readers' feedback. And for somebody who has written a very interesting book as yours, which is quite, if you ask me, it's quite heavy. It's one that people will read and quite start some debate, if you ask me. But then I wanted to
Mhm.
ask you, what kind of, because sometimes some readers may get the message that the author intended, while some would interpret it quite differently and get close to getting the message. And sometimes you might find some readers who would just misunderstand the entire book and interpret it upside down. And
Mhm.
as intrinsically fun as they sound, I would like to ask you, how do you feel? Not quite sure if you've experienced that, but if you have in the past, how do you feel when readers interpret your work differently than you intended? How does that make you feel as a storyteller?
I don't get bothered too much. I guess that's the the answer to that question. I feel, truth always resides behind the veil of fiction if we're writing a novel. So by nature, fiction is supposed to leave a lot of room for interpretation and ambiguity, and that's really what I'm aiming for most of the time too. So I don't want to prescribe feelings to my readers. I don't mind at all being misunderstood. I actually think it's very cool that, individual readers just find their own personal meanings in my story based on their lived experiences. I had a early reader um, who were who was telling me the main takeaway from this book for her, and she was very much focusing on sort of the love triangles in the second half of the book. She really brought into a lot of her own romantic experiences or dating experiences and interpreting these three characters who are in this life love triangle. And I was absolutely fascinated by it because that wasn't what I had in mind.
Yeah.
um, Writing about these three characters, but that was the meaning she found, and it was very meaningful to her, and it seemed to have uh, shed light on something she didn't think about in her own experience, and that was actually to me very very great to hear. So yeah, in general, I mean, if the reader's meanings are different from my intention, I think it can actually often open doors to genuine discussions, and hopefully genuine understanding. So I'm happy to know, the book stir up conversations between humans. And, another example I got from early readers, some readers were quite, bothered by some scenes of violence in the historical part of the book. And they interpret it as something different than I thought. I end up having some dialogues on the Instagram with them.
Mhm.
It's interesting to me because I'm obviously not writing about violence gratuitously. I am writing about a historical period that is intrinsically violent, and it's important for me to have that sense come through in the writing. But I also appreciate the feedback that, sometimes, for instance, animal cruelty, right, is not something we tolerate in this day and age.
Yeah.
And how do we portray that in a common way, in a modern way? Yeah, it's something I grapple with, and it's always good to hear from this readers. So in general, I don't mind if the interpretation is different,
Mm,
as long as they they feel something and they think about something after reading the book.
wow. I love your take on that, actually. That's such an amazing, beautiful, and awesome one. Thank you for because I find it to be quite interesting, actually, how people, readers, interpret, messages quite differently than
Mhm.
how, it's beautiful how people give different interpretation to work of art, quite amazingly. And I wanted to ask you, because readers always lovely to be on the scenes detail about an author. What are a few fun or unexpected things about you that might surprise us if you are like to share?
Um, I'm not sure this will surprise people, but obviously I used to write in Chinese. I grew up in China
Mm,
until early 20s. Um, so I was an avid reader, and then later I tried my hands to write quite early on in primary school. So at the end of grade three, I was able to publish my first story in a national youth magazine. Of course, it was a Chinese story, and looking back, I was surprised that it was able to be published and it passed the censor because
wow.
it was about a king who abolished all the clocks in the country so he could exploit the workers by having them just always work overtime. It was kind of very dark allegory, and and it was actually published in this biggest national youth magazine. So that was
Mm,
something I find surprising. So I am also a musician. I play piano. So to me, music is quite important part of my life. But people always ask me, do you listen to music when you're writing? What music do you listen to? I actually don't listen to music at all when I'm writing. But sometimes what I do is before I write, I will find specific music just to access a certain memory or a certain kind of mood that I think I need to write the section.
mm,
So I do that. When I read, here's something, I don't know if it's good, but I do like to annotate my books in emergence when I'm reading. My family think it's a bad habit, but to me, I feel like it's my way of having a private conversation with the author. When I'm sort of annotating my books, I was really paying attention and writing down my thoughts and having that private conversation.
mm,
And also I have young kids, so I'm a very kind of busy, always busy because I've got young kids, and but I do find my kids is really the source of my creative energy. I
mm,
think when I was a person without kid, I had all these notions and ideas, but I didn't really have the drive to put on paper. But somehow, after becoming a very busy mom, I have now all this creative energy to do the writing.
wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's quite amazing to know. I love your answers to these questions. Quite amazing and quite great. And just apart from The Immortal Woman, do you have any other works that you've authored or say currently working on?
Yeah. So I am slowly working on, I don't know exactly what this is going to be. I currently call it a novel in constellation.
Mhm.
Some people may call it linked short story collection,
Yeah.
but I feel it's closer to a novel than short story. It's sort of a mystery, but literary mystery. It has an accidental immigrant sleuth, who being the main character, and she has a queer best friend who is sort of
Wow.
the main antagonist in the story. And because it's structured in this shorter fiction but linked this fashion, there are tales from the Chinese front of the World War II during the Japanese occupation. There's tale set in a snowy mountain in Tibet, and
Wow.
there's a tale set in modern day AI sweatshop. So I'm still in the process of putting them together. Yeah, so stay tuned.
Wow, that's amazing, really. I hope that goes well. Quite interesting. Hopefully, when that is up, we'd like to have you back on the
Oh,
show to
thank
talk
you.
about it. That would be great.
Oh, that would be fantastic.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. And just in case we have some viewers who are currently listening to this interview and would love to get a copy of The Immortal Woman, on what platform is it available on for purchase?
Yeah, I know your listeners are all over the world.
Yeah.
So in Canada, this book is available anywhere new books are sold. So really any bookstore will carry it. In the States, this book is distributed in most bookstores as well. You may have to order from the bookstore. If the listener is outside North America, they may be able to order from their English language bookstores in their local location. But the easiest platform to get the book outside North America is likely to be Amazon.
Mm,
And in terms of me, you can connect with me on Instagram as Su Chan Writes, or through my website, suchanauthor.com.
mm,
And I'm always happy to have a conversation with my readers. So feel free to um, uh, direct message me on Instagram or send me an email through my website.
that's amazing to know. And I left a link in the description part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy of Su Shang, the Immortal Woman, directly on Amazon, Barnes& and Nobles, on our website, and also on other platforms. I also left a link to our social media pages for possible followings. So I want to say thank you very much, Sue, for joining me today to talk about your amazingly written The Immortal Woman. I find this to be quite interesting, quite awesome, quite great, and thank you very much for joining me in conversation.
Thank you so much, Peter, for inviting me and for this great opportunity to have a conversation. And yeah, I always learn a lot talking
Yeah,
to the author. So thanks so much.
it's my pleasure. It's amazing to have you on. Thank
Thank
you.
you.